Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is your old pal Matt Orozco from Macabre Daily, and I am joined by none other than Powell Robinson, who is the director of photography on the recently released Hulu film Mr. Crocket. Powell, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. As I was just telling you before we hit the record button, really enjoyed Mr. Crocket. In fact, another of my colleagues, Jamie, reviewed it for the site, and she enjoyed it as well. So it was great to get this chance to speak with you about the film, especially with such a unique visual look to it. Um, So my first question for you is, I'm going to feign a bit of ignorance here, as someone who went to film school and knows what a cinematographer and a director of photography does. I also don't, know the ins and outs of the day to day. So one of the things I was curious about is once you've gotten a script for something like Mr. Crockett, how do you collaborate with the team, with folks like, Brandon Espy on the director side and Michelle Patterson on the production design to really think about what you want there, what everyone wants this film to look like?
Totally. Luckily, I've worked with Michelle a lot before. She did another film with me called Appendage the year prior, and we've actually been friends since USC. We did all of our first movies together when we
Oh,
graduated, so
cool.
we've been collaborating a long time. Yeah. So I'll go one by one. So with Brandon, every director's approach is different when they're talking to a DP. Some of them want to give you like 100 reference movies, and they want to give you like a lookbook with like 300 shots of just a reference for every single shot in the entire film. Some people just have a feeling. Some people are like, I want the movie to feel like the color blue, and you're like, all right, great, that's awesome, sure, let's go from there. um and I love all these different approaches. Brendan um was a good mix of hands-on and off. When we first met, he sent me two reference movies and a list of a couple others just in case, but he was like, look, I don't want this to only feel like a horror movie. The script was written to have the feeling of a 90s drama, and we want to approach it that way, and then the horror just happens to come in. And so he gave me Juice and Menace to Society as his two main look references, and then we were trying to find the right tonality for the actual horror and maybe the overall comedy. And so he brought in New Nightmare as the kind of sort of, the hook for those two as far as horror is concerned. And so we started there, and I just tried to figure out the pieces that made the most sense to take from those movies. Um, One of the big ones was the color for Crockett's portal.
Right.
In the script, it was just written as an eerie light. And so, there's in horror, there's an infinite number of ways that could be taken.
Right.
But I was watching Menace to Society on repeat, and there's a party scene at the beginning there that's lit with just red and orange, red and purple colors, excuse me.
Yep.
And the first time that came on screen, I called him immediately and I said, "This is it. Bear with me. I think this is going to make a lot of sense when you see it. But if we take these two and we alternate them in some weird kind of flickery, stroby pattern, I think you're going to have a really unique, strange tone for this thing, and it's going to just it'll be like the last thing anybody expects for this color palette." And so, yeah, we went with that, and then it ended up bringing sort of this like cosmic horror almost feeling to the portal, which
Yeah.
I love that. I thought that was
Especially with
great.
the moon in the face and everything. It's got that
Yeah, he
weird.
ends up existing in a whole other dimension, and it really just it worked on a whole bunch of levels. So with him, it was just going through and cherry picking these reference movies, like finding pieces that we liked and applying them to a horror look. And then on top of that, we shot listed traditionally like anyone would. Like, we met up way before the movie started. We went through the whole movie and his shot list for it. And then when we got out there, we went to all of our locations, and for as many as we could, took actual reference photos using an app called Kadrage that I like. It's like Artemis. It's a digital director's viewfinder. And so we just tried
Cool.
to previs as much of the movie as we could so that everyone would be on the same page with us. Which I know Michelle and I have a system now too, where especially in these smaller movies, you aren't necessarily able to dress a house fully decked out in
Yeah.
360. And so she'll know, like, oh, I'm looking at this side of the room more than like any other side of the room, or I'm looking over here for this scene. And so it won't need to look good in daylight, but as long as it works for nighttime, like she'll take all the references and figure out how to adjust her planning and budget to work for what we're actually going to see on screen. And not waste time just dressing an entire set that like half of it we're not going to look at. So luckily we've had the time to work that process out in the last 10 years. So pretty seamless there.
Yeah, it's nice to have that kind of working relationship because it's a very common theme in a lot of these conversations we have is that, Oftentimes if you find people that you work really well with, you want to bring them back into the fold as much as possible because not only does it benefit the filmmaking process, but obviously it offers a shorthand as far as how you work together that makes it a little bit easier to collaborate. And it's so interesting that the reference points were, Juice and Menace Society because you can see so much of that almost kind of matte finish colored look that comes off those early 90s films. Even I was thinking of True Romance as kind of that scene with Drexel, in the beginning it's got the smoky kind of red haze in his apartment and it's got that very much sinister vibe to it. So just fascinating to see those references and how they kind of translated here.
Yeah.
Um, and when it comes to capturing something that's period specific, right? This obviously taking place in the 90s the 90s has a very distinct look, although it doesn't feels weird to say that as someone who grew up in the 90s.
Yep.
But do you find that they're like how kind of your approach for doing something that's more based on the time period versus something that's more modern? Um, is there anything that's kind of what's the difference between those two approaches as far as how you go about it?
Hmm. Yeah, it was a tough balance because I've got, one of the things they don't tell you about is when you're signed on as a DP, you're often getting not just what the director wants out of the movie, but you've got a whole producing team behind you that needs the movie
Right.
to be a certain way so they can sell it. And so if you've got the pressure creatively to make it feel like, and I hate the fact that it's a period piece because I am also a 90s kid, but like it is technically a period piece. And then on top of that, you've got a whole production company that needs to be able to sell the movie to a group, like to an audience that might not necessarily want to be signed up for a period piece. And so you've got to find this weird line to walk where um, you take what you can, but not all of it. And,
Right.
and so it needed to have a lighting style and a color palette and an aspect ratio and the quality of the lens that felt like the right era, but it couldn't actually feel like we put grain on it and we definitely graded it to feel like a film stock, but we didn't soften it and make it look like a previously scanned film stock. It didn't it
Like a
didn't
VHS or something.
it didn't feel like it was shot on actual 90s stock. The LUT that we used for grading was in fact emulating a 90s stock, but we didn't like soften the image so much it felt overly vintage. Like it had to be authentically done with the same techniques, but not like retro fetished to oblivion in post, if that makes
Right.
sense. Like it had to you would notice that like we used a very blue 90s moonlight, but the night scenes weren't so dark that you couldn't see anything. Like
Right.
it had to have the right pieces and then just be reapplied to a modern image that would stream well on Hulu. It was a very interesting challenge, and not unlike a challenge like the previous film I did, Appendage. It was distinctly very horror and very comedy, and it was also, while using practical effects, did not want to feel retro. And so it's kind of the same thing where like I feel like I keep getting the practice of tightrope walking multiple genres and multiple styles and trying to make them look like one cohesive thing. And it's just become, I guess, part of the process now for me. And like the kind of movies I get brought onto just have very unique, bizarre tones. And so it's a fun challenge trying to find the right pieces.
I mean, I think you pulled it off extremely well because one, I think you raise a good point, which is when people are watching something like a period piece, they also don't want it to feel like they're watching something that was made so intentionally to be, kind of rubbing your face and, oh, look at it, look at the film grain. But instead, it should feel kind of very germane to the period, but also have the the polish, if you will, of something modern, so that it can at least appease our modern sensibilities. So even down to the costuming and like the color of Mr. Crockett's outfit, it's like very uniquely 90s, but looks beautiful on the way it's
There's
shot.
I had to find a way to describe it, and I feel like this is actually the first time I'll say it clearly because I've done a couple interviews for the movie and I never quite said it right. There's a very big difference between making a movie now that is supposed to be about a previous period versus making a movie supposed to look like it came from a previous period. Like to make a movie now about a previous period, I would have done vintage lenses and I would have probably hammed up the, the look a little bit more in the grain, and like made it feel like a modern movie about a different time period. But Brandon very much wanted to feel like it was an actual product of that time period, which to me radically different. Like
Yeah.
that, in the 90s, they were trying shooting for the most, they were still on film, and so a lot of the lens technology was designed to give you the clearest image possible and like the sharpest image possible to combat the artifacts of shooting on film. And now we're like throwing on the funkiest, weirdest lenses onto digital to try and fuck it up. And so if I did that, it would have just felt like we were currently making something about the 90s, and that wasn't like the vibe. Brandon was very sincere from the beginning. He was like, no, our reference movies are supposed to be what this movie feels like it's from the same era. And so just an interesting puzzle, to
Yeah.
try and what the difference is between those two very subtly different approaches. But yeah, it was cool.
I think the line was walked perfectly. Like I said, it looks, it doesn't feel like obvious to the viewer that, what we're watching is something that's intended to be from a period, but it feels unique to that period. And again, some of it's the costuming, even there's very little mention of the actual time period. I think a handful of times that, you see dates, but everything
Yeah.
else just feels very much like I grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on PBS in the 90s, which were at that point, I'm pretty sure reruns, but nevertheless, it does have that look to it, albeit a little bit more darker tone
Yeah.
than Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
Um, now you've
Yeah.
done a lot of you've done a lot of previous genre work. I was looking at some of your previous work and even going back to the Crypt TV stuff you were doing in the past. So clearly you've been working in genre for a while, and I'm curious to know kind of how your vision and approach to genre film has changed since those early days, and what lessons you've learned and been able to apply to something like Mr. Crockett.
Totally. Um, I think early on, especially when you're getting started as any artist in this industry, your outlook is very much yours. Like, and I don't mean that in a positive or negative way. It's just you come in, and the only way you can think to do things is from your own perspective a little bit. Where like you get brought to a horror movie and you you just think, what do I find scary, and like how am I going to like this to look like what I would think is scary, and what is my own personal taste, like how do I want to, this is the contrast level I like, this is how I like things looking. And it's because you haven't had the experience yet to work with enough different directors and different craftspeople to learn like maybe what you're seeing is and should only be a piece of the puzzle, and how they are seeing it is equally or more important than just like, it's very easy as a DP when you're young to be like, well, I'm the DP, so it's going to look like how I want it. And
Right.
that's, I guess, an approach, and that's fine. And some DPs get by just on that no matter what. But learning that you've been hired for your taste, but not necessarily um as the gatekeeper to the look as a whole. I think the look as a whole has to be from everyone, and especially you know, trusting that you know a lot more about the technical side and how to achieve the things like the directors after than they might be, but they're the one top down who should be telling you this movie should feel like this. And if there's a scene where you've pushed something too far and they go, this is too far for what the movie is, it's not your job to be like, but I like it. And then they're like, cool, but like it makes no sense for what the movie is. And then you just keep shrugging and saying, but you hired me to make it look like how I would. And it's like, cool. But no, they hired you to make the movie look like the movie should and not how you think it should. The movie has I feel like every script, once you involve a group of people, there's sort of this like um weird shared consciousness floating in the
Yeah.
middle of like what the movie wants to be, and everyone has what they want the movie to be, and it's all sort of flowing towards what the movie itself needs to be. And the best movies come from when everyone kills their own ego and lets the movie be what it needs to be.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the conflict I was talking about earlier, where it's like, well, I've everything I've learned says if I'm shooting a movie about a period, I should use a vintage lens to make it, you know, feel period. It's like it's totally wrong. Everyone from that period wouldn't have done it. The movie wants to feel like it's from then. So how do I do that? It's a very, yeah, it's crazy. I think some people just light with more contrast. Some people put the camera in a place that feels voyeuristic and scary naturally. And I feel like that's kind of the best. Those are the qualities that people look for in a horror DP. It's not necessarily that like, I mean, you learn tricks along the way. You learn what makes an image scarier than a not scary image. You learn stacking shadows and letting people come in and out of light. You learn all the basics of it. But at the end of the day, I think every movie falls on the shoulders of people who understand that you're in service of not only making it scary but also making it what it needs to be.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense. I mean, I think it's kind of, we all bring our ideas to, I mean, filmmaking is one of the most collaborative forms of art, because you, in most cases, can't do it on your own unless you're just kind of a one-man production, one-person
yeah.
production, rather. So again, that idea of all of everyone's opinions flowing into the singular idea of what the movie becomes makes a lot of sense. I think you're right that true kind of, experience allows you to let go of what you think is right and then learn and grow from what's around you. And we see this so much with other filmmakers that kind of, again, especially do a lot of genre work and have started in genres that, they tend to have a lower ego because there is a lot of, I think, compromise that goes into whether it's working with a lower budget, working with different resources, or, in the case of cinematography, trying to create a look with that's very much limited by what's available,
Mhm.
what you can do with it. So, another thing I was really curious about is, I'm a big fan of Alex Party's work, and I thought it was so amazing to see his designs kind of his come off of a page and onto something three-dimensional.
Oh
Did you get
yeah.
a chance to work with him at all as far as how you shot and lit some of those creations that he designed up with the rest of the production team?
Unfortunately, no. He and I met after the movie was done. I saw him at Comic-Con once we'd shot
Okay.
it. I was like, "Dude, it's you!" And he was like, "Dude, it's you!" And like it was a great moment for us. But no, I would just get drafts, and they'd be like, "Here's what the monsters are going to look like," and it was nice to just kind of, get a heads up from the. I was there from the concept stage to the actual puppets getting shipped to us. But no, I mean, one day we're shooting a happy Mr. Crocket set, and the next day the production design team has lit the whole set on fire. And, I fucked all my lights up so they look messy, and suddenly the puppets are there looking hellish. It was just, a movie like this, you just live it. All you can do is you live it one moment to the next. There's not a ton of, you can't look 3 weeks ahead. You don't even have the gear. You don't have the crew to do it. You have to just, we had some pre-planned things, and I could go into the whole Crocket set was probably the most intricately planned thing for everybody, just because it had to be the same lighting setup and same stage space for both the happy version and the hell version. So all the same lights and all the same dressing had
Oh
to work.
wow.
And so it was crazy to in real time go from happy to that. And same with the puppets. There was kind of a no turning back point for us in some ways, where it's like, once you fuck the puppets up, now they're that. And
Yeah,
like
you
luckily,
can't unsplatter the blood.
yeah, exactly. And so, luckily there were two sets. There were the happy looking ones and there were the fucked up ones. But again, the fucked up ones had to somewhat be shot chronologically because, yeah, like Blue tears someone apart. And so it was just sort of like that kind of planning had to be there in terms of careful chronology. But no, they showed up and I just did what I thought would be cool and then luckily it worked. but
Yeah, no, they're such a unique look, and I think the way they're shot particularly doesn't show so much of them where it kind of makes them unscary, but shows just enough where it kind of unnerves you, especially the chair scene. I can't stop thinking about the little mouth behind it.
chair was amazing. The chair was also crazy on set because, you know, that mouth, it was a person with their arms in this thing, like doing so every shot of the chair was a plate shot because you had to paint the people out who are operating the chair. And, it was a fun practical and VFX combo for a lot of these things that I think everyone's been very focused on the practical effects because they're very, very good. But we had a very good VFX team as well who was making all the practical stuff actually shine. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff that wasn't there that people will think was practical that was not. And it's all all my praise to the practical effects team for doing a very good job. But I just always feel like it's been this weird Hollywood push to negate the work that VFX has done to bolster what we do on set. And we had a lot of that as well.
It almost feels like a bit of a correction, right? Kind of this over-indexing towards compute to VFX, computer animation. Now we're seeing kind of a renaissance or return to more practical, but the appreciation, because I think most people, you're right, haven't actually seen a scene without post. So they
Yep.
don't know to what extent, like how much of this is like, I think I was watching Abigail, one of the special features, and they were showing just how much of the blood and the gore like is actually done on at the time practically, and then how much is added in post to really elevate it.
Yep.
I think you're my particular favorite effect in or integration of digital and practical was probably the eyes. The kid's eyes is
Oh
so
yeah.
effectively well done, and doesn't feel over the top. So, my last question for you, pal, is my favorite question to ask everybody is, if you were asked to program a double feature with Mr. Crockett, what is a movie you think would go really nicely alongside of it?
Huh. Let me think about that. That's a fun question. Hmm. Normally, it's such a unique, weird movie. I'm like, would it be funny back to back with a Pee-wee's Playhouse, like a doing like a one to the other, or like an episode of like Mr. Rogers right into this? Would it prime you in a funny way?
I mean, that could work, right? I've heard some
Yeah,
interesting examples here. I think I was on a having speaking with somebody who was part of this big supernatural film and said, "Oh, we should put Casper on, right next to it,
yeah.
so it brings some levity to the situation."
Yeah, I feel like it would be kind of funny to see one of those and then jump right in. I feel like that would be a great, yeah, some kind of kids show right before it, just to like really get you in the wrong mood. And
Especially in '90s kids shows, like or even the comes over to the '70s and the '90s, put on a Bozo the Clown episode or something like that, and
yeah,
show people what real terror used to look like. But uh, Powell, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, and I want to remind everyone watching this that Mr. Crockett is available now on Hulu. You can watch it. You can watch it again. It's a real pacey, like I think 80 something minutes, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. And hopefully, I don't know. It seems like there may have been door left open for a potential sequel, so fingers crossed. But is there anything else you're working on, pal, before I let you go?
yeah, totally. I just wrapped another film called The Red Mask. It was shooting here. It's a very fun scream-like slasher thriller style thing with that kind of meta aspect to it. So just finished that, so hopefully that's coming out next year. And yeah, I'm signed on to a couple things I can't talk about, but that is yeah, more horror movies next year for sure.
Amazing. Well, pal, thank you again for this. Can't wait to see the rest of your work in the future. Again, fingers crossed for some 2025 releases.
Thank
And
you.
you always have a spot here to chat about them if you ever like it. So please feel free to come back again.
Appreciate it. Will
All
do.
right. Take care, pal.
Yeah, thank you.